Well, hello. So today's the fifth day of hunger, and on this day, I want to illustrate further the problem of the old age dependency ratio and why it has become an existential problem. I want to do this by using three different graphics. So I'm going to share the screen now and go to the first graphic. Here we go. What I have here is the population structure of Japan in 1950 here on the left side. And on the right-hand side, the population structure of Japan in 2023. As you can see, this is a classic pyramid, right? With lots of young people at the bottom of the pyramid and very few old people at the top. And this one is an inverted population pyramid, or it looks like a nuclear explosion mushroom. And what we have here is few young people and lots of old people. Looking at the ratios, in 1950, there were 35.53% of the Japanese population were youth, were young. Working age 59.59, and the old represented only 4.87%. So there was an old age dependency ratio of 12.22, 12 people, 12 working people for one retired person. Today, we're looking at just 11%, 11.55% young people, working age 58.47%, but the old have exploded to nearly 30%. So now the old age dependency ratio is 1.95, so fewer than two working people supporting one retired person. And this has happened because governments have interfered with the people's reproductive system since 1950 and have reduced the number of children born from year to year, and now have inverted population pyramids throughout the developed world. Japan is the most extreme case because they lost the war and the Allied powers went in there and subjected the Japanese population first to all these methods of population control. They use the Japanese, in other words, as a testing ground and as lab rats. Moving further, as to the median age, look what has happened to the median age. So in 1950, this is what the average Japanese looked like, right? Very young. The median age was just 21 years. And today, the median age is 49 years. This is what the average Japanese looks like today. So from a country of young people, Japan has become a country of old people. And it's the same in Europe too, but Europe is maybe 5-10 years behind Japan. So whereas in 1950, nearly 60% of all dependents were children and only 10 were elderly, in 2023, more than 50% of all dependents are elderly and just 20% are children. So the vast majority of the social costs now go to support the elderly, while in 1950, the vast majority of the social costs were invested in children. And this will only get worse. The problem with this, beyond the exploding costs to governments, is that any money spent on the elderly will not have any return on investment, since they are no longer active in the workforce and will remain inactive and a burden until they die. By contrast, any money invested in children will provide a return for decades to come as they become adults and enter the workforce. So and this is the age dependency breakdown. As you can see, in 1950, very few elderly, lots of young people. Now has completely reversed. Lots of old people, very few young people. Yes, an important factor is that a retired person costs governments nearly 4 times more money than a child. Actually, it's 3 to 7 times, depending on the person. So consequently, an elderly person is the equivalent of, let's say, on average, 4 children in terms of how much money a government must spend in social programs for the elderly. Last but not least, whereas children are dependents for at most 25 years if they go to university, the elderly could be dependents for as many as 60 years if a person goes into retirement at age 50 and lives to be 110. And there are lots of those cases in Japan. I think there's about 100,000 Japanese who are over 100 years old. When pensions were instituted at the turn of the 20th century, at least 20 workers supported a single pensioner. And now we have fewer than two supporting one pension. And this is what will happen to the old age dependency ratios. Today in Japan, it's at 54%. And Japan is crushing, right? It's been collapsing economically because this is unsustainable. Once you reach 42% around here, right, the economy starts to flatten out. By 42%, by 54%, you've already lost a third of the GDP, which is what has happened to Japan. But in 2050, the old age dependency ratio is going to be 80.7%. And it'll go down slightly to 75.3%. I doubt that will happen. And Japan will go into a demographic downward spiral, and it'll just destroy itself. Will collapse completely. So this is clearly unsustainable, and the only way to address this problem, right, to prevent the old age dependency ratio from continuing to climb, is to introduce RAD, required assisted dying, and keep the old age dependency around here, 20%, which enables a decent standard of living for the young, who otherwise have to support this tremendous and unbearable costs that the old represent. Now, let's move to the second graphic. Sorry, not this one. This one. So here I show a structure of the population in terms of dependents and contributors to society. So this is the generation that supports everybody, right? The working generation. So let's look at this couple here. Say the father earns 5,000, the mother earns 5,000. They're 30-plus-year-old. They have one child, right? The child costs them, let's say, $500 a month to support. But they have this generation to support their own parents, right? Which are four: the parents of the mother, the parents of the father, and depending on how long these grandparents or the parents will live, they are possibly a burden on taxpayers from anywhere from 0 to 65 years. And their total cost per month would be $4,400. I considered, $1,000 per person in pension and $100 in medical cost is a very conservative estimate, just to keep the numbers around and easy to tally. So they will cost about $4,400 out of the $10,000 that these two earn, right? $4,400, almost half, would have to go to support their parents in old age. But what happens if people start living much longer? Let's say 100 years, then you're adding another generation who needs to be supported in old age from anywhere from 0 to 45 years by these same taxpayers here. So those would be their grandparents, right? And the number doubles, right? So we have 4 parents and we have 8 grandparents. So the total cost of the grandparents would be $8,800. Well, you add $8,800 with $4,400, and you're getting what, $13,200. So already their cost would be beyond the ability of this working age generation to support two generations in old age if all of these old people live. But what happens if life expectancy rises to 120, right? Then you're adding another generation, the great grandparents, right? So there will be how many of those? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. And then with those 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28. So potentially, in the worst case scenario, these two working people would have to support 28 elderly in old age. And, these, let's say if the old age, the life expectancy reaches 120, then this generation of great-grandparents would have to be supported by these push marks for 0 to 25 years. And this is, obviously unsustainable. And it is unsustainable now also because couples don't have any children, so they don't even replace themselves, right? So this couple, this is sort of the average in Japan now. In many other countries, they have only one child. So the problem is going to get worse from generation to generation. It's not going to get better, and we're already at the breaking point. So we're not going to make it to the next generation because society will collapse. All right, let's look at the next one. This. Here I illustrate the problem of assets and liabilities. So when does a human being become a liability? And that depends on the life expectancy and also the number of working years as opposed to the number of years that a person is dependent. So once again, looking at a Japanese example, when life expectancy was 60 years, retirement at 55, people went into the work. People were dependents, right? As children and adolescents, they were dependent for 18 years, then they worked for 37 years. And then they retired and they had 5 years of retirement. So they were dependent for 23 years and productive for 37 years, which means that every Japanese was a social economic asset for 14 years. Well, life expectancy rose. It is 85 years today, retirement age 64. So because of the requirements of longer education, now on average, people, let's say, enter the workforce at the age of 22. So they're dependent for 22 years in youth and for 21 years in old age, and their working age contributions lasts 42 years. So they're dependent for 43 years and productive for only 42 years. Therefore, every Japanese is now a social and economic liability for 1 year. But once we add unemployment and maternity leave periods, the length of the liability period extends considerably by at least 4 years. Therefore, for all intents and purposes, every Japanese now represents a net liability of circa 5 years. And this is actually a lot worse because the women's participation in the workforce in Japan is very, very low. But I simplified things for the sake of easy math and an easier way to understand. So what happens if life expectancy rises to 100 years? The retirement stays at 64, right? Then the longer the life expectancy, the longer governments will try to keep people in education. Why? Because there won't be enough jobs for the young. So they will delay their entry to the workforce. So they'll be dependent in youth for 25 years, and then they'll be dependent in old age for 36 years. And their working period will be only 39 years. Therefore, every Japanese would be dependent for 61 years and productive only for 39 years. Therefore, every Japanese will be a social and economic liability for 22 years. So obviously, a society cannot function if everybody is a liability. For society can only function if the vast majority of its citizens are an asset. That is how wealth is created, and that is how wealth is sustained. So now, hopefully, you all understand the deep shit that we're in. All right. Thank you so much. I'm going to conclude now.